All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, according to where you are. I hope you are all doing well, and glad you could all join us today. No, I don't like to waste too much time, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right into a quick introduction of the ICCP. Who is the ICCP? What are we? What do we do? Well, we are a professional members organization that recognizes those with the skills, qualifications, and expertise in the professional management of construction claims. And we have three primary objectives, which are to establish international professional standards for the management of claims, to give recognition to those who have gained the appropriate knowledge and experience in the management of claims, and also to help and educate those who wish to gain that experience. So why is there a need for the ICCP when there are so many professional construction organizations? Well, quite simply, construction claims have become a key part of the international construction industry. And many of our participants or many of our members come from a variety of backgrounds, from engineering, quantity surveying, project management, legal, and on and on. And until the ICCP, there has been no institute that specifically recognizes those who have the specialist knowledge, experience, and skills to manage, prepare, and respond to claims to the highest level of professionalism. Okay, so I will quickly introduce our steering committee. We have our founder and executive officer. We have an elected president and three elected steering committee members, one of whom is about to give this presentation today, as well as our general manager, who is currently on maternity leave, so I am covering for her. Okay, in terms of membership, we have three regular levels of individual membership. I'm not going to go in depth in each of those here, but each of them do have their own set of criteria. We also have two levels of student membership, and we also have corporate membership, which is for companies that either specialize in claims or have specialist claims departments. So if you would like to know anything more about those, please let me know. And what is in it for the members? Well, we have a members area of our website, which has a knowledge bank, which is a collection of research papers, white papers, case studies, etc., on contracts and claims topics. We have education and training and bookshop areas, which collate information on education and further training, as well as the latest industry releases. We have a growing bank of templates for our members to use, which can save them time, as well as ensure that their claims are done to the highest standard. We have regular CPD sessions such as this one. So members who attend today will receive a CPD certificate. That is a benefit of membership. We also have the ICCP Academy, which are more technical sessions, which are for members only. We have discounts on books from Wiley Blackwell and Rutledge, as well as from our training partner Claims Class. We have a monthly newsletter to keep our members up to date on what's going on in the industry. We offer industry exposure in the form of a public listing of our members, as well as a certificate of membership and logo. We also have a private LinkedIn group where our members can discuss their contracts and claims questions. And we have the optional benefit of our register of claims practitioners, which is a popular option with our members who are consultants. Okay, and I know that was all very quick. If you requested additional information when you registered for this webinar, I will be emailing you with further information. You can also email me at jennifer.smith@instituteccp.com or visit our website, instituteccp.com. And with that, I will hand this over to today's presenter, our steering committee, Mansoor Ali. Thank you, Mansoor.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, ladies and gentlemen who have assembled for this webinar, let me welcome you all and hope you get the benefit out of today's session. Just wanted to keep you informed that a series on FIDIC White Book was published during the last couple of months in LinkedIn, and the last part of that series is due next week. This will be reposted on the ICCP site once again, starting from next month. And those who attend this today can refresh the course once again through the ICCP platform. Before we start, let me extend my sincere gratitude to my colleague Jishma Joy. You will see her on the screen, but she's on the backstage anyway. Jishma had given a great hand in making the series up. Also, thank you, Jennifer and ICCP, for this opportunity again. And the wonderful crowd who have gathered deserves all my applause. So we'll be sailing through the latest FIDIC White Book edition published in 2017. But at the onset, I will explain the history of this FIDIC edition, which is Client Consultant Model Service Agreement. So those who are in the consultancy background need to be familiar with this book. While our focus will be on the 2017 edition, I will also sail through the differences from the previous edition of 2006 as well. All right, moving forward with this FIDIC White Client Consultant Model Agreement, lastly published in 2017, FIDIC also published the second edition of the Subconsultancy Agreement to be in line with the new FIDIC White Book. Through this book, a fair balance of risk is provided between the client and the consultants and intends to cover the minimum requirement of a typical appointment contract between client and consultant. As you all know, the consultants get engaged in various jobs like bankable document, feasibility studies, detailed design, tender engagement, and or site supervision, and the project management works, which could be for the traditional employer design projects or design and build projects or EPC, and lately in the design, build, operate projects also. FIDIC White Book is suitable for any of these services and is very much used preparing agreement between the client and consultant. The story of White Book starts from 1990 when the first edition was published. Subsequently, in 1991, in a year's time, the second edition was published. And the third edition came out by 1998. The fourth edition of 2006 was a popular one. However, the latest edition of 2017 is the most perfect client consultant model service agreement with a fair balance of risk between the two parties. Now let's go into the contents of the 2017 fifth edition FIDIC White Book, which contains, like any other previous version, the form of agreement, the first one, then the particular conditions, which has two parts. Part A, reference from clauses in the general condition, and the part 2B, which is additional or amended clauses. So in the part B, there are 5 appendices. In 2006, there were only the 4 appendices, which was the scope of service, personal equipment, facilities and service of others to be provided by the client, remuneration and payment, and the program. But in the 5th edition, there is a rules for adjudication also added to this, this new form. The last part is the general conditions, which we will be discussing in coming few minutes. I hope you are able to understand what I have conveyed so far, as many of this will be repeated and will be more easier as we move along. Now let's quickly make a comparison on the main clauses on the 4th edition and the 5th edition. But before I go a little bit more, let me explain you that the 4th edition, there were 8 clauses, with the clause number 4 of the 4th edition, commencement, completion, variation, and termination. However, in the 5th edition, this thing has been now separated very clearly, and they have a clause separate for commencement and completion. They have a separate clause for variation to service, and a separate clause to the suspension of service and termination, making FIDIC 5th edition 10 clauses in place of the 8 clauses which was there on the 4th edition. So let me also like what I said earlier, the appendix 5, which is the rules for education, is added to the 5th, is added as the new 5th appendix in the 5th edition. Let me go a little bit more detailed. While the same clause 1 is the general provision in both 4th and the 5th edition. There are many new clauses like intellectual properties, the relationship, amendment of agreement, good faith, etc. added in the 5th edition. Likewise, clause 2 is client in both editions, where the structure is similar. However, all the subclauses are elaborated in more detail in 5th edition. And one change in the 5th edition is that the subclause 2.9, payment for service, is removed from the new version, which actually is covered in the payment clause anyway. And clause 3 is consultant in both the cases, but in 5th edition, it is enhanced by adding new subclauses like safety and security of consultant personnel and the contract administration. So like what I said earlier, the 4th edition had a clause 4, which was commencement, completion, variation, and termination packaged together. Whereas in the 5th latest edition, the clause 4 only deals with commencement and completion. Variation to service is an independent clause and described in detail by adding impact of variation and procedure for reaching the agreement of variation value, which is clause 5 in the new edition. And clause 6 in the 5th edition is suspension of service and termination of agreement, where the effect of suspension and effect of termination subclauses are added newly, which makes easier for the parties to understand the consequence of such events. With this, the clause number starts changing. You will see that, clause 5 in 2006 is payment, whereas it is clause 7 in the 5th edition. Although the structure and content is same in both editions, more time constraints are specified precisely in the 5th edition. Liability is in clause 6 in the 4th edition. This is now clause 8 in 2017. They're generally similar in structure, but the indemnity subclause is eliminated in the 5th edition and added in clause 9 as indemnity insurance. Clause 7 of 2006 and clause 9 of 5th edition is insurance. Insurance of client's property was detailed as a subclause in 4th edition, but this is better explained within the one subclause of insurance in the 5th edition. Last clause in the 4th edition is clause 8, dispute and adjudication, whereas it is now clause 10 in 5th edition, which is dispute and arbitration. It was dispute and arbitration, so it's the same dispute and arbitration, but adjudication is added in the latest edition, recognizing the dispute and arbitration. And in appendix, the previous edition had 4 of them, whereas 5th edition has a 5th appendix, which is rule for adjudication. So that was some high level on the clauses. Now let us move forward and get more detail on each clauses and see the difference in previous edition versus the latest edition of the FIDIC White Book. Starting with clause 1, general provision, although there were 10 subclauses in 4th edition, the 2017 edition has 16 subclauses, as you can see in the slide. While communication and notices were 2 separate subclauses earlier in the 5th edition, it is together like any 2017 Rainbow Suit publications. The new subclause includes confidentiality, relationship of parties, agreement amendment, serviceability, non-waiver, and some important additions like priority of documents and good faith. Copyright in previous edition is now changed to intellectual property. I hope you may all know that copyright is just one of that part of intellectual property, or intellectual property is much broader and contains 4 items like patents, trademarks, copyright, and trade secrets. Moving forward with clause 2, the client, the subclause in both editions are generally the same, although the latest edition is detailed well. However, the subclause 2.9, payment of service in 4th edition is omitted in the latest edition as detailed earlier. Clause 3, the consultant has 7 subclauses in 4th edition, whereas they have 9 subclauses with the 2 additional ones, safety and security of consultant's personnel and construction administration. Small changes are there in the names of the subclause in 2 edition as highlighted in the presentation. But more than that, the contents have been refined in the latest edition. This analysis is a high-level one, and we will try to go into detail as we move along. Again, like what I said in the 4th edition, clause 4 was commencement, completion, variation, and termination, all bundled together in one clause, whereas this is now separated in the 5th edition, with the clause 4 as commencement and completion. where a new subclause of program and rate of progress of services is added. Now, variation to service is now detached as a separate clause 5, and clause 6 in 2017 edition is suspension of services and termination of agreement, where the effects of suspension as well as the effect of termination and its procedures are more detailed. Generally, payment is having similar subclauses in both edition, except it's clause 5 in previous edition, and now it is clause 7 in the 2017 edition. Similarly, you can see changes in liabilities and insurance apart from the clause numbering. And in dispute and arbitration, like the Rainbow Suit of 2017, adjudication has been added, and its consequences for the failure to comply has been added as separate subclause and detailed well in 5th edition. Going in a little bit more detail on the changes from 4th edition to the 5th edition, although the structure is similar, the latest edition have more elaborated clauses, making them more convenient for implementation in its new edition compared with the 4th edition. Variation and termination is separated from the commencement and completion, as well as the rules for adjudication is added in the 5th edition. And a new obligation on the parties to act in good faith and in spirit of mutual reliance has been included. Now there is a clear order of precedence of document establishing within the form of agreement, making it more clear that the particular conditions takes precedence over the general conditions. Another refinement is the guidance to fill the Appendix 1 scope of work, which is described in detail. The exclusion, functions and purpose of the service, then any information such as subsurface or hydrological condition relied upon by the consultant in the discharge of service that cannot be reviewed by the consultant for accuracy and sufficiency. And finally, the construction administration requirement to be fulfilled by the consultant, and identify the interface management between the service and the services provided by others, etc. Meantime, I just want to answer one question which came in during this time, before we started the presentation, that what happens if like only electrical or mechanical job has to be awarded to a consultant through a client? Again, that's where you make that scope of work much clearer to it. And like what I said, 2017 or FIDIC White Book is good enough for any type of services, for any even traditional service or even any part of the services. Moving forward on the termination now, the 4th edition does contain a termination for convenience clause, but does not differentiate the effect of it from other forms of termination. Whereas the 5th edition clarifies that if the agreement is terminated by client for convenience, then the consultant shall be entitled to be paid the loss of profit that would otherwise have been earned on the service not performed due to the termination. 5th edition allows for termination by either parties, the client or consultant, immediately on defaults like bankruptcy and corruption. The consultant's right to terminate for suspension of work is now reduced to a shorter time frame, which is 168 days versus the 182 days in previous edition. Also, the right to suspend services for non-payment is now 7 days rather than the 28 days in the previous case. I hope you're able to follow this. I'm trying to make it a little lengthy, but it's certainly going to help you, to as we go along. Now, variations is now a separate clause in 5th edition with clear time limits for the submission of variation request and proper methodology of variation. In short, according to 5th edition, a variation may be issued if either there is an amendment to scope of services and personal equipment and services provided by the client, or omission of part of the service which is no longer required by the client, or changes in the specified sequence or timing of the performance of service, or change in the method of implementation of services. 5th edition includes a detailed exceptional event procedure which shares the risk of an event between the client and the consultant. Also, a new provision of variation is added, that is, where an exceptional event gives rise to an unavoidable change in the scope of service, then a variation shall be issued by the client. Where standard of reasonable skill, care, and diligence only applies to the performance of the services according to the 5th edition, it has now raised the standard of care to the works to be expected from a consultant experienced in the provision of services for projects of similar size, nature, and complexity. This you will find a lot in the new FIDIC 2017 Rainbow Suite with the contractors also. A comprehensive adjudication procedure, including appointment of adjudicator, his payment, etc., have been amended to the dispute resolution provisions and set forth in the new appendix of the 5th edition. Thereby, prior to any referral to arbitration, any dispute not resolved amicably will first need to be referred to the adjudication. 5th edition includes a new provision if the consultant is providing consultant's construction administration in relation to the service to be carried out under a works contract. Under this provision, the client shall indemnify the consultant against any and all claims made by the contractor against the consultant arising out of the works contract. If an ambiguity or discrepancy is found between the consultant's obligation under the agreement and the consultant's duties, the consultant shall give notice to the client indicating the same, and if necessary, client shall issue a variation to the services also. In the 5th edition, consultant may, upon 7 days notice, revoke any intellectual property license granted therein in the event that the client is in default of payment of any amounts due under the agreement. This is fairly evident incentive to ensure that the client does not unreasonably withhold payments. Through the 5th edition, client has a new responsibility to accept the consultant will rely on the accuracy, sufficiency, and consistency of all information provided by the client or by others on behalf of the client. Equally, consultant has an obligation to review such information to the extent achievable using the standard of care to ensure that there is no manifest error, omission, or ambiguity in the information, and to promptly give notice to the client of any adverse finding. So generally, the 5th edition White Book seems to have addressed many of the former problematic areas recognized in the 4th edition. As a result of the change, the parties will be in a better position to realize and manage their risk allocation. I know this was a lengthy and repetitive round of discussion. Before we get to the critical points of the latest 5th edition, meantime, I want to request you to kindly post your questions, and if time permits, Jennifer could read them out in a bit for me to answer them to the best possible way. Now, let's focus on the FIDIC White 2017 edition and touch base some critical point introduced. Although it may sound repetitive, however, will refresh you all and keep you fully familiar with this client consultancy model agreement. So in subclause 1.3, notice and other communication could be any form of agreed system of electronic transmission, which was not allowed in the previous versions. So this could be any form of agreed system of electronic transmission as far as it is stated in the particular conditions. Notice and communication, as the case may be, shall be clearly stated with reference to the subclauses and shall not be unreasonably withheld or delayed. Also, if there is an appointment of a subconsultant already included in the consultant's offer or proposal, then a consent from client is not required. Otherwise, subcontracting part or full of the work require written client consent. Through subclause 1.7 intellectual property, the consultant shall grant to the client a royalty-free worldwide license to use and copy the foreground intellectual property for any purpose in connection with the project. Now, I think this is what I said a little while ago earlier, that in case the client is delaying the payment, the consultant has the right to stop giving that royalty. So automatically the client will feel the pressure and feel that they have to be paid their dues in time. While information of the project can be used for commercial tendering purposes, publication of material require approval from the client if it is within 2 years of completion of the service or termination, whichever is the earliest. And on the anti-corruption, as a minimum, the consultant shall comply with the FIDIC Code of Ethics and the FIDIC Integrity Management System, as well as notify immediately in case of any public official requesting illicit payments. Now, as in all the latest FIDIC suits, the client shall submit reasonable evidence of financial arrangement for timely payment within 28 days of request from the consultant in case he asks for. One other improvement is that consultant shall arrange for an alternative supply of personnel at the client's cost in case of failure by the client to supply his personnel, or if the consultant is not satisfied with the performance of the personnel supplied by the client. At the same time, the cost of replacement shall be borne by the consultant, except where the replacement is requested by the client. In case if client requests, then the client shall bear the cost of replacement unless misconduct or inability is the reason for the replacement. In the subclause 4.3, you will notice a notice to be given by any party in the event of any specific actual or probable future events or circumstances which may adversely affect or delay the service or lead to an increase in the cost of the service. Like earlier said, the consultant has the right for extension of time if the delay is due to a variation of service, or the delay caused by the client or the client's other consultants, contractors, or other third parties, or an exceptional event, or any other event giving an entitlement for extension of time for completion under the agreement. So, rate of progress through subclause is a new addition, and it states that if consultant is not entitled for extension of time, and in client's opinion, the rate of progress is insufficient to ensure completion, the client may give notice to the consultant, and the consultant shall revise program by adding new measures to complete the service within the time of completion. Subclause 4.6 details exceptional events now, where if a party is not permitted to perform its obligation due to an exceptional event, a notice shall be given within 14 days from when the party becomes aware of such event. And if such event gives rise to a mandatory change in the scope and delay in services and lead to variation, then consultant is entitled to claim extension of time. Nevertheless, the commitment of payment under the agreement shall not be excused by an exceptional event. Clause 5, variation is very detailed. Variation is applicable only in the case where there is an amendment to scope of service or personal equipment, facilities, and services of others to be provided by the client, or omission of part of the services which are no longer required by the client, or changes in the sequence of services, or changes in the method of implementation, or provisions of the agreement requiring the issue of a variation or proposal submitted by the consultant and accepted in writing by the client. Consultant shall submit notice with details if an instruction or direction from the client constitutes a variation, and if accepted, client shall issue a variation order. However, if the consultant gives notice to the client with evidence that it does not have relevant resources to carry out the variation, or consider that this will significantly change the extent of service within 14 days from issue of the variation order, then then he is free to abstain from that additional works. Otherwise, the consultant shall be bound by each variation. If the client doesn't accept the variation, he shall cancel the instruction by giving notice, and in this case, consultant shall comply with such notices unless he refers this as a dispute within 7 days of receiving such notices. Now on the clause 6, suspension of services and termination of agreement. While client may suspend the service for any reason by giving 28 days notice to the consultant, consultant may suspend in case of non-payment by due date and client haven't issued a valid reason for non-payment by giving 7 days notice to the client, or because of exceptional events contemplating safety and security of consultant's personnel, or failure by the client to satisfy the requirement of client's financial arrangements. Consultant shall resume the services within 28 days of the receipt of notice from the client instructing to resume the service. In case of suspension from the consultant, then the consultant shall resume the services as soon as reasonably practicable after the matters giving rise to the suspension have ceased. Consultant shall not perform the service during suspension, but shall ensure the security, maintenance, and custody of the services. If during suspension and resumption, consultant incurs exceptional cost, agreed remuneration shall be adjusted, and the time for completion shall be amended. Consultant shall issue a notice for these exceptional costs. Now, if the consultant is in breach of material term or condition of agreement, client may give notice outlining breach. If consultant doesn't remedy the breach within 28 days from the notice, then the client may terminate agreement, giving 14 days notice. However, if the consultant becomes bankrupt or insolvent, or if a breach of anti-corruption, then client can immediately terminate the agreement. Client shall, in these three cases, means when the consultant goes bankrupt, insolvent, or breach of anti-corruption, then the client shall take over the records and documents, claim consultant for reasonable cost, withhold payments due for consultant until accomplishment of stated entitlements. Client may also terminate the agreement if in his sole discretion, giving consultant 56 days notice, not with an intention to obtain services from others or by himself, then the consultant shall be entitled to be paid loss of profit that would otherwise have been earned on the services not performed due to termination. Client may also terminate if an exceptional event has led a suspension of service more than 168 days after giving 14 days notice to consultant, and in this case, consultant shall be paid with an agreed remuneration. Consultant may terminate the agreement if suspension of services by client's sole discretion prolongs to more than 168 days with a notice of 14 further days. On non-payment, if the consultant doesn't receive his payment after due date, plus 7 days qualifying suspension, plus 42 days after suspension, and with a notice of 14 days, consultant may terminate the agreement. Also, consultant has the equal opportunity to terminate if client becomes bankrupt or insolvent or is in breach of anti-corruption, then he can terminate the agreement immediately, like how the client could terminate the consultant's agreement. Also, if suspension of service due to exceptional event prolongs more than 168 days, consultant may terminate the agreement, giving 14 days notice. In all the case of these consultant terminating the agreement, consultant shall be entitled to be paid loss of profit that would otherwise have been earned on the service not performed due to the termination. Now on the payment, consultant shall be paid within 28 days time after giving the invoice, which may include the payment of services, variations, and exceptional cost. On the exceptional cost, the basis shall be Appendix 3, remuneration and payment, if rates and prices are applicable. If it is not the case, then new rates agreed, and if no agreement is happening within 14 days from such notice, then reasonable rates and prices applied. And if client delayed payment within 28 days, then he shall pay the compensation, financing charges, at the rate specified in the Appendix 3. However, if any item in the invoice is opposed by the client as not properly due under the agreement, client may give a notice of its intention to withhold payment with reasons within 7 days from the receipt of the invoice, but shall not delay the payment of the remainder of the invoices. The one notable point here is that there is no specific information regarding the final payment in the White Book. Things like exempting the consultant's personnel, those are standard. Now, the consultant and the client shall be liable for each other for any breach of any provision of the agreement, with the maximum amount of damages payable in respect of any liability, not exceeding the amount stated in the particular conditions. Liability clauses shall not apply if claims arising out of the fraudulent misinterpretation or reckless misconduct by the defaulting party. Now we go to the insurances clauses. Now, consultant through this 5th edition 2017 publication has to take out professional indemnity insurance, public liability insurance, work compensation insurance, employer's liability insurance, and any other insurance required by the applicable law. Professional indemnity insurance shall be maintained for the period of liability stated in the particular condition. Consultant shall notify the client immediately should any of the insurance required by this clause be cancelled by the insurers or underwriters. One good thing on this is that the 5th edition emphasizes the requirement of such insurance to be placed with insurers of international repute and standing. And on the dispute, once a dispute arises and a written notice is issued from a party, within 28 days time, senior representatives of the parties with authority to settle the dispute shall meet and try resolving amicably. So amicable is the first one. Then if it is not settled within another maximum 56 days of written request, then comes the adjudication. If on the adjudication decision there is no further notice from any party within 28 days of issue, then this decision is binding. However, if there is no decision within 28 days from the adjudicators, or a notice of dissatisfaction is issued within 28 days after the decision is issued, then both parties shall attempt to settle the dispute amicably. One more round. However, unless both parties agree otherwise, arbitration may be commenced on or after the 28 days after the day on which this notice was given, even if no attempt at amicable settlement has been made. This shall be settled by international arbitration. If arbitration doesn't commence within the 182 days from the notice of dissatisfaction commencement of arbitration, then NOD will be lapsed and not valid anymore. Here comes an end of this session. I hope it wasn't too long and we have some time for the Q&A with the floor open for all of you. I want to thank you all one more time for the patient staying back. Thanks again to my dear colleague Jishma Joy, ICCP, and of course Jennifer, who will start back in action reading the questions now.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, everyone. We have 12 questions and 2 hands raised. So we'll dive straight in with Bashir's question, who asks, what changes have been made to the dispute resolution mechanisms in the 5th edition of the FIDIC White Book? And how do these changes reflect the current state of international construction law and practice?
All right, now, Bashir, this is very much in compliance with the latest FIDIC rainbow suits, where adjudication also adds up. So if I go back to that slide, maybe I can go back there, or let me see. Yeah, see, here is the thing, until the 2006 edition, there was nothing called an adjudication. In the new contracts, you will find until 1999, it used to be DAB only, Dispute Arbitration Board. Now DAAB has come with an adjudication in mind. So the whole point is before really getting into an arbitration, there is an adjudication now being initiated. This would, allow the process to be amicably solved, because otherwise the whole process has to be dealt in an international arbitration method according to the new procedure and according to the 2017 Rainbow Suit edition. So first, when the dispute comes in, with the, as soon as the written request comes in within the 28 days time, there is an amicable dispute attempt done. And this is normally being considered by the senior representatives of the party with authority to settle such disputes, meeting together and trying to resolve. Now, if that is not solving, then it goes to, within the 56 days, before it goes to arbitration, it goes to the adjudication. A clear-cut rules of adjudications are there. Who pays for the adjudication? All of them are very clear. Now, these adjudicators have an intent to try to resolve the dispute. So if they are not able to resolve the matter, then again there is one more round of an amicable settlement being thought in before it goes to the arbitration. So it is very much in line with the latest DAAB procedures, which most of the people who are following FIDIC will be familiar with it. I hope, Bashir, I answered that clearly.
All right, thank you. Okay, moving right along to Rajesh Kumar's question. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. Do you think that the need to negotiate an agreement of the fees for variations may delay a project if the consultant is not required to commence the varied service until an agreement is reached?
Well, I completely could not understand the question, but let me tell you now, the client has no right to remove or omit an item for his convenience, meaning that in case he plans to do it himself or to do it by his own other sources, he cannot do it. And if he wants to do it, the route is too long because he has to give a minimum 56 days notice for a convenience removal. And after the 56 days also, the consultant has to be paid for the loss of profit. So I don't think a client will take that route now. The other case is, what about the variation? Now, any additional thing will, there might be a rate already established in the Appendix 3, because consultant service is basically what, man-month rate. So those may all be established on the Appendix 3. So for any reason, now, these rates are not established. There is no item which could contemplate to a variation coming in. Then naturally there is a round of discussion on it. I think that was also said, if you see, let me try to go back on this. Yeah, here you will find that, on the variation, you'll say that the notice shall be submitted by a consultant. The unit rate, they are taking it from that Appendix 3, but for any reason that rates are not available, then there should be a fair way of settling it. Yes, it may take its time, but then what's the other way out? The best thing is to have it agreed. So consultant shall submit notice with the detail if an instruction or direction from the client constitute a variation and is accepted. If the consultant gives notice to the client with evidence that it does not have relevant resources to carry out variation or considers that this will significantly change the extent of the service within 14 days from the issue of the variation, then the client is free to abstain from that, then the consultant is free to abstain from that additional work. Otherwise, he's bound to take the work. So I hope I answered it right, Ravish, right?
Okay, thank you. He has a second question. In the 4th edition, the consultant is not required to commence the varied service until such time as the client has given written approval of the fees associated with the varied service. What about the 5th edition? Is it changed or does it remain the same? I feel it might delay.
Yeah. No, there is an equal obligation. Like if you see a contractor's general conditions, you will find that a payment goes 28 plus 28, 56 days. Whereas for a consultancy service, it's only 28 days because his services are much different. So similarly, if a variation is coming and if there is nothing officially written from the client, the consultant is not obliged to start working, and the client knows that the delay is on him. So only with the proper notice, the consultant is supposed to be taking up any further works. That is anyway part of the contracts.
All right. Okay. The next question, Sar asks, good afternoon. Please, assuming a consultancy is awarded, but the consultant doesn't submit an acceptable first deliverable, e.g. inception report, even though he has been given the opportunity to make good a number of times, can such a contract be terminated on the basis of non-performance?
For asking some wonderful question. But you see, one of the few of the fundamental reasons for a client to terminate a consultant. The first one is the material breach, and a poor performance is a material breach. The only thing is there is a route to it. He first have to give a notice period. Like if I go back to the same thing, I can explain you. See now if you see the termination of agreement by the client, the first item, if the consultant is in the breach of agreement, then he can just remove the consultant. But there is a route to it. If the consultant is breached, then client may give notice outlining breach. If the consultant doesn't remedy the breach within 28 days from notice, then the client may terminate agreement, giving another 14 days notice. So 28 plus 14 days is a time period which client can use if there is a breach of agreement, meaning a poor performance happens. All right, sir.
Okay, and he has a follow-up question. Can a termination of convenience be considered an amicable settlement, supposing there is a dispute?
Can termination of convenience be considered an amicable settlement? Suppose there is a dispute. I mean, amicable settlement can be anything, right? That is left to the parties. Yeah.
All right, next question. Dhruba asks, the standard of care and competency have become more subjective. Even if the consultant is being unable to deliver the service because of incompetency of its professionals, does not realize that he is not incompetent. I'm not sure there. How can the client apply this clause to compensate the losses incurred or terminate the consulting service?
The question is not clear, but let me tell you, in the 4th edition, the standard of care was a general thing. But in the 5th edition, it is very specific for the performance of the services. And it has raised the standard of care of the work to be expected from a consultant, experienced in the provision of service for a project of similar size, nature, and complexity. So I'm not sure exactly the question, but you know, what used to be a general clause is now very specific for the performance of the services.
Okay, thank you. All right, another question from Rajesh Kumar. Nowadays, in most of the projects, the clients are behaving very smartly. Instead of issuing termination of convenience upon receiving the competitive price from the market, during the middle of the project, the client is issuing a letter saying that the consultant has accomplished all the services as per contract and thanking the consultant without even providing a minimum 1 month notice to demobilize. Is there any grounds to claim in FIDIC 4th or 5th edition? Thanks.
Well, I thought I explained this in very good detail. I mean, one of the best advancement, one of the good improvement on the FIDIC 5th edition on the White Book consultancy client model agreement is that this is very well regulated. You cannot just terminate a consultant because the client wants to do that job or wants to get it done through his people. And if he wants to do it, he is free to do anything. But he has to give a 56 days notice to the consultant with an intention, without an intention to obtain service from others. But anyway, even if he has an intention like that, he still has to give a 56 days notice period. And after the 56 days notice period is given, that is like almost 2 months' time. By the time somebody else who have quoted might be a different rate. Despite all these things, now, once the consultant is moving out, he shall be entitled to be paid loss of profit. Loss of profit that would otherwise have been earned on the service not performed due to termination. So in reality, the client is not really benefiting because he cannot, through FIDIC 2017 White Book, he cannot remove a consultant very quickly. He has to remove it after 56 days. And when he removes after the 56 days, what he has not done, he has to still be given a loss of profit of those works.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up from Bashir. Another question for Mr. Mansoor. What provisions does the FIDIC White Book 4th and 5th edition make for a consultant to suspend their services if they have not received payment from the client? And how do these provisions impact the relationship between the consultant and the client?
See, fifth edition now says that if the consultant is not paid within the 28 days time, he can give a notice, and after 7 days, he can suspend the services. This is for suspension. Now, after that 7 days time, he still doesn't get the money. He can give another notice for a 42 days time, and he can even terminate that. And during this termination, meaning that let's put it this way: if the consultant is not paid within the 28 days time, he can give a 7 days, and within that time, he qualifies for a suspension. So he can say, client, come on, 28 plus 7 days gone, you don't pay me, I suspend the service and I wait till the payment comes. Then after 42 days, during the suspension, nothing is happening, then the consultant can give another notice of 14 more days. So 35 plus the 42 plus the 14 will entitle consultant to terminate the agreement. Consultant has the right to terminate. And if he is terminating the agreement, the client has to pay for the loss of profit that would otherwise have been earned on the services not performed due to termination. This is number one. This is through the termination clauses. But otherwise, if he doesn't pay the money within the 28 days time and the consultant wants to continue working, he can get the financing charges, which is already indicated in the particular conditions, or even in the Schedule 3. So there are so many routes. One is that he is good to run the job. The client is good. Client is having some financial difficulty. He should continue working it, and he should be getting the financing charges for the period subsequent to the 28 days time. So I don't know what relationship is there. It depends on how they are handling it. There is wonderful route for the consultant now. Before that, 7 days qualifying suspension time was 28 days in the 2016 edition. So it's far better if contracts are being done on a 2017 FIDIC White Book. All right.
Okay, thank you. Right. Next question. Ghulam asks, how to cover or claim for inflation if the rate of escalation is fixed while signing the contract?
How to cover claim inflation if rate of escalation is fixed? Yeah, if rate of escalation is fixed while signing the contract, what's the problem? I mean, I thought if it is not fixed, how do we handle it? If it is fixed, that's the way forward, right?
So clear enough then. Okay, the next question is anonymous. Are the exceptional events clearly defined? And do you have any examples of a clearly defined exceptional event?
Let me show that thing clearly. So there is no definition of exceptional events now, like a contractor's, FIDIC contracts. There's no clear definition that this and this and this becomes an exceptional event, like it said, the war, hostilities, and all that. But how to handle an exceptional event is more clearly detailed here. I'm just trying to get that page so I can exactly say it out. Yeah, it's not detailed that what constitutes an exceptional event, because I think exceptional event has been so clearly detailed in the other FIDIC contracts. So the detail of exceptional events are not there. But what happens, how is it being handled on an exceptional event? That is very clearly detailed now. For instance, if party is not permitted to perform its obligation due to an exceptional event, a notice shall be given within 14 days from when the party becomes aware of such event. And if such event gives rise to a mandatory change in the scope and delay in service and leads to variation, then consultant is entitled to claim extension of time. Nevertheless, the commitment of payment under agreement shall not be excused by an exceptional event. But yes, they are not talking about what are the exceptional events. You're right. That's a good point to keep in mind.
All right. And I think the next question from Southis is somewhat closely related, are COVID-19 situations raised in FIDIC White Book?
2017 edition, this is.
Yeah, so maybe the next one.
Maybe the next one.
Okay, another anonymous question. Is there any guidance or insight on the liability percentage for both parties?
Normally it's a project value, but then again, if I think I clearly talked about this liability thing, and it is the value as stated in the particular conditions or in that documents, related to that. So you decide how much liability you want to keep it for the consultant. You can keep it like that. So shall be liable, both the client and the consultant shall be liable for each other for any breach of any provision of the agreement, with the maximum amount of damages payable in respect of any liability not exceeding the amount stated in the particular condition. So it's a choice, to state that actual amount what you want to see the liabilities covered.
Next, Khalid asks, can the contract be lump sum or are rate prices remeasured in the White Book?
Why not? Why not? Either of them, no problems. It's not an EPC contract per se. It's a service between the consultant and the client. So you will find that in the same thing, you can have a lump sum and you can have a combination of lump sum and unit rate also. Like, for example, design is always done on a lump sum and unit rate is done on, and supervision is done on unit rates.
And Khalid then verified lump sum. So I think that has been answered. Okay. And Yusuf asks, why do you have to pay the consultant the expected profit after termination of a contract? If I heard you right.
You see, I am given a job and I'm doing half of that, and the client comes and stops me doing the remaining half. I think it's just a logic, that my loss of profit for the work which you take it back has to be paid back. That's how exactly it goes into.
Thanks, engineer, for the detailed presentation. I want to be enlightened on what the new edition of the White Book has stated on force majeure events, bearing in mind cyclone events that have been encountered in Malawi.
Yeah, I'm one who worked in Malawi, so recent cyclone is the reason why this discussion came in. But for a consultant services, force majeure is not a critical factor like a contractor. Anyway, these are all part of the exceptional events, and it is very clearly stated out that if anything which is an exceptional event comes out, the route is all clearly stated. So all what we need to do is to prove that it was an exceptional event. Of course, this time the new cyclone was an exceptional event, and that's a good route to prove that it was an exceptional event and that should be paid with an extension of time. So there is a route for it here in White Book.
All right, thank you very much. Another anonymous question. If a variation is to be made under the contract, is it a must for the rates to be the same as the rates initially used in the contract? Or can the rates be revised even for similar services in the original scope?
No, I think it's very clearly stated that, variations, additions, if there are rates established in the Schedule 3, they should be followed. Only the case happens when there is no rate, then they should agree. And if they don't agree, then there should be a way forward. But as far as a rate is there, then I think you should be following that same rate. If we go back to that, I'm trying to see the actual text of it, but it should be from the same rates. As far as the rates are available, it should be used that same thing. Right.
Okay, thank you. Also anonymous, for a consultant, are both workers' compensation insurance and the employer's liability insurance required? Aren't they similar?
No, workers' compensation is the consultant's workers' compensation and employer's liability is the employer's liability. So these are two different things. And they were not spelled out in the 2006 earlier version. Now it's very clear that, while you insure your people, you insure the employer's people also, or the client's people.
This question is from Khalid. What about the force majeure in this consultant contract?
We talked about it. There is nothing called force majeure now. It's all exceptional events, so that's all we discussed.
And Mashuk asks, are there any special courts dealing with construction-related cases?
Every court in the world is dealing construction-related case, but we are only talking about FIDIC here.
Okay. Dhruba asks, could you please explain more on insurance, primarily regarding professional indemnity, how the consultant indemnifies the client on account of design failure, inappropriate selection of technology or materials? Shall the client be responsible for reimbursing the premium? And who is liable for the payment of the premium?
Payment of the premium is paid by the consultant in the professional indemnity PII policy. And he also has to keep in place the PII policy until the time period stated in the particular conditions. And for any reason, the insurers are, for any reason, the insurance is cancelled by the insurers or underwriters, that also the consultant shall notify to the client. And also one important requirement in the 5th edition is that the insurers shall be placed with insurers of international repute and standing. So, it's trying to bind it very well. Now, professional indemnity insurance is very, very critical. An error in design, which could cause a huge damage to the project later. Who's going to cover it? The client doesn't have that background. That's why he's giving a job to a consultant. So an error, a misconduct, not a misconduct, an error basically of the design has to be paid back. And that is why the professional indemnity insurance comes in. And this amount of the liability will be always covered, and for the period valid will be covered in the contracts, which has to be followed by the consultant, and he has to pay for it.
Okay, thank you. Sathis asks if employers' claims are covered in the White Book, and if so, which subclause?
Employer's claim is what? I couldn't completely understand, because the whole contract is for both parties. There is right for both the parties, and both the parties' rights, be it a suspension, be it a termination, be it as a general thing, is all stated very clearly in the FIDIC contract. So I couldn't completely understand the question. But if you see the clause 2, the client, that covers all his obligations and what he is getting out from.
All right, thank you. All right, Kishan asks, will this also work for lump sum contracts, and what will have to be adjusted in the particular conditions?
Yeah, I think we spoke about it. It will be detailed clearly on the Schedule 3, the payment, payment and remunerations. There it will be stated very clearly the basis, the background on lump sum or remeasurable or unit rate, whatever it is. That's just how you write it. It's not on a particular condition. It is more on the rates and the detail in the Appendix 3 of that conditions of the contract.
Riaz asks, how does an employer choose the reporting period and value of PII for the consulting service? If there is no PII in place, is there a remedy or recourse way for the employer to recover the damage due to negligence or incorrect advice?
I don't know. That's very, very difficult question to answer. Imagine you don't ask something, although the contract gives you a provision, and you did not ask for it, and then you say that what happens if such an occasion occurs. I don't know whether I can answer such things. That's too big. Yeah. But in the general condition, there is a provision that the consultant has to take a PII. But in the conditions, it is said that the amount, the duration will be stated in the particular condition. Now, somebody who is drafting the agreement should be seeing that he covers this point very clearly. Otherwise, if it is not covered, nobody covers that. Yeah.
How are you doing for time?
Last two questions, maybe.
Okay. All right. Last two. Khalid asks, the consultant must continue his monitoring and contract management as his duties to contractors, even if his payment was blocked by the client, or must the consultant continue his monitoring and contract management
I think we talked about it, I mean, it is a goodwill now. If the consultant knows that there is a financial problem with the client and he doesn't want to suspend it, then he can continue working and he should be paid the financing charges according to what has been stated in the contract. Now, if he say, no, the best way to, get out of this is suspend it, then, after the 7 days notice, after the 28 days when he should have received the money, he doesn't receive the money, he has the option. He qualifies to go for a suspension. And after the suspension, he wants to hold it 42 days time, plus the 14 days, he can even terminate it. And then he can get all the loss of profit back in his account. But this is how a judgment of a consultant would be. Because if the job is going on, if the client is paying to the contractor, the client will have the money to pay to the consultant also, which is much smaller in comparison for what he is doing, the monitoring and contract management. So I don't know, unless the payment is deliberately done, then it should be a judgment. But there is a route for continuing the work. There is a route for suspending or terminating.
All right, thank you. I'm going to do a sneaky one. The next question is actually, where can we find the FIDIC White Book? And that is from the FIDIC website. So our final question will be from Clarence, who asks, who says, FIDIC has recently issued a guideline on how to handle COVID-19 and Ukraine war and the administration of construction contracts. Can this be applied equally to consultancy contracts as well?
Yes, of course. Let's wait for the new edition to come in.
Nearly 150 people who have stuck with us to the very end. So thank you all. And of course, thank you, Mansoor, for presenting, and Jishma for your behind the scenes work.
I was there, yeah, just I was doing something. Yeah, it's okay. Hello.
Hi, Jishma. Thank
Hello,
you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, that's wonderful. And whoever would like to, get another insight of all these presentations, all these things, either through the LinkedIn video, me and Jishma are presenting, which you can see it, or, ICCP will be reposting the whole thing in the coming days.
Yes. Yes, I will have this reposted on the website as well as our YouTube channel. And if you asked for further information about the ICCP when you registered, I will be emailing you, as I said, with additional information and also with the link to the replay. All right. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mansoor. Thank you, Jishma. And also thank you for staying and answering extra questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to everybody's, but
Jennifer, in case you can send those questions to me, I will send it to them directly with their mail IDs.
So that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. All right. Well, with that then, goodbye, everybody. Thank you all, and see you next time.